So you ready for that election in November, Senator?
I'm ready.
All right, all right. Did you go to
Good
Washington,
evening.
D.C.?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You are listening to the new WCEG network on WCEGTalkRadio.com. You can click live stream or you can watch us via your smart television by YouTube and then type in WCEG network. My name is Norman A. Carter Jr. I am your host for this special edition of Issues and Answers on WCEG. We are the worldwide community empowerment group where we speak life into the community. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and on Instagram at WCEG underscore talk underscore radio and at WCEG Network. And just for clarity's sake, I'd like to remind all that the topics and opinions are those of the show host, moi, and our special guest, and not the WCEG Network. We continually thank you for your support. We have a tremendous program today with a very, very special guest. And this is part of our desire to bring information, particularly with the coming elections, to our listeners and to really get you all the information you need to know for voting and for our candidates, especially our illustrious candidate that we have for today, Senator Nikema Williams. We also have with us today Miss Damita Chatman of the Citizens of Excellence and Elected Leaders, and she is going to be our co-moderator, co-interviewer. She's really going to help me out when my mind goes blank and I can't think of anything else to say. But center stage, ladies and gentlemen, we have Georgia State Senator Nikema Williams. Welcome. Welcome to WCEG. It's great having you today. Thank you for coming with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here.
I am so glad. You have an extensive biography. We only have a short time. I'm going to try to run through the high points right here because I think your background is important and our viewers should know about it. So please indulge me for a few minutes while I tell those who don't know a little bit about you. Senator Williams is originally from Smith Station, Alabama, and was born into a family of leaders. Her father was a neighborhood leader, and her great aunt, Arthurine Lucy, integrated University of Alabama. Hero alert. Arthurine Juanita Lucy is an American activist who was the first African American student to attend the University of Alabama in 1956. Her expulsion from the institution later that year led to the university's President Oliver Carmichael's resignation. Shame on him. Years later, the university let her enter as a master's student, and monuments honor her sacrifice that she made. Senator Williams, you come from great stock. She graduated from Talladega College, where she became a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Sorority very close to my heart. Takes a long story. We get into it later. She graduated a Bachelor of Arts degree in biology and moved to Atlanta in 2002. We continue. After moving to Atlanta, State Senator Williams joined the Young Democrats of Georgia. She then served as Vice President of Public Policy at Planned Parenthood Southeast. In 2011, she was elected as the first Vice Chair of the Democratic Party of Georgia. She served as interim chair of the party in 2013 following Mike Berlin's resignation. State Senator Williams supported Barack Obama, who was he, presidential campaign and served as a member of the Obama Victory Fund in 2012. Did a fantastic job there and raised over $50,000 for that campaign. In 2017, she was elected to the Georgia State Senate in a special election. And she was one of 15 people arrested during a protest against the handling of the 2018 Georgia gubernatorial election. at the Georgia State Capitol on November 13th, 2018. Definitely remember that. Oddly enough, the charges were dropped in June 2019. On July 2020, following the death of the late Congressman John Lewis, she was selected to replace him on the November ballot for Georgia's 5th congressional district in the 2020 election. She will face Republican nominee Angela Stanton King in the general election November 3rd. On September 2020, a special election was called by Governor Kemp to fill the remainder of Congressman Lewis's 17th term, and Senator Williams is not part of that special election. I want to make that very clear. That election at the end of September is only to fulfill the last 60 days or so of former Congressman Lewis's term. Welcome. Whew, I'm out of breath. Miss Senator Williams, would you care to give us your platform, a description of your political platform for the coming election?
Absolutely. Thank you, Norman, for having me this evening. And thank you, Damita, who we share some Alabama ties and Alabama roots. Thank you for being here and inviting me to be a part of this conversation and to share a little bit about me and my views around my becoming the next congressional member from the 5th Congressional District. There are a few things that come to mind when I think about why first I want to be a member of Congress and why I'm so honored to be and fortunate to be the Democratic nominee for the 5th Congressional District. One of them is, as you mentioned, I grew up in Alabama and all of my family is still there while I'm over here in Atlanta. And we hear a lot about Georgia being a battleground state, and we are. We're going to win in November, and we're going to make sure that we are electing Democrats up and down the ballot. My views, not the views of the radio show. And part of that means going to Congress. I have the opportunity to pass laws that impact the entire country, not one state. I might be the member of Congress from the 5th district, but the laws that I pass as a member of Congress will impact the entire state of Georgia and the entire country. And so I have an opportunity to dig deep into those matters that should be equalized across the board. And at the forefront of those are healthcare and voting rights. I know what it's like to be without care when needed. In 2017, when running for the state Senate, I had a car accident on I-20, headed to a senior home while I was doing a campaign event. And my car was totaled, and I sat on the side of the road and watched my car being taken away because my car had insurance. It was going to be taken care of, but I was on a leave of absence for my job. And in our country, insurance, by more often than not, is tied to your employment circumstances. And I didn't have insurance at the time. And when the ambulance arrived on the side of the road, I declined treatment because I didn't know if I would be able to cover the cost. No one in this country should go without the care that they need because of their inability to pay. We should make sure that in this country, healthcare is a basic human right. That is my belief, and that is what I'm going to fight for when I get to the United States Congress. Another thing is voting rights. As you mentioned, in 2018, I was down at the state capitol during a special session, and I was standing with my constituents who were demanding that every vote be counted after the 2018 gubernatorial election. And in that aftermath, standing there, I wanted to make sure that my constituents' voices were heard and that they were safe and taken care of. Little did I know when I arrived that morning for a special session around Hurricane Michael relief that I would end up in jail that night at the Fulton County Jail at Rice Street, taken to jail, walked out of the state capitol with my hands in twist ties by state patrol and taken down and sat there and booked mugshots and all. And I still have a firm belief, even before that moment when I was arrested, that every vote should be counted and we should have equal systems across the country. It shouldn't matter what state you're in if you're able to cast an absentee ballot, which, by the way, is the same as voting by mail. Some people in our country right now would have you to believe that if you choose to vote by mail, it is different than voting by absentee ballot. It's the same thing. And I want to go to Congress to make sure that no matter where you live in this country, your constitutional right to vote is protected and equalized across the board.
Fantastic. I just like to, for our younger folks, to let them know that you read about the historical John Lewis and how he suffered so much for trying to get people to exercise the right to vote. And here in Georgia, we had in living color on the evening news this senator being arrested. And I clearly remember that even the announcers were flabbergasted at the news announcers were flabbergasted at what's happening. So I'm sorry you had to go through that, but it really points to the fact that there's a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely. I was flabbergasted as well and never thought that that's where I would end my night on that day. I remember with my cell phone still in my hand, my purse was still upstairs, and I was trying to hand my phone off, telling someone, I have a 5-year-old son. He was only 3 at the time, telling them, make sure that you call my husband and make sure that somebody's going to pick Carter up from daycare, because that was not a part of my plan that day.
Wow. And it's really flows into one of my questions, one of my first questions, is that the Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act of 1964 was declared unconstitutional because it specifically referred to southern states, where we are, who had a long history of voter suppression and voter intimidation. Do you have a strategy for addressing this issue once you arrive at Congress? If so, please let us know.
So right now, the Voting Rights Act is getting a lot of attention in the days following Congressman Lewis's passing. But what I want to make sure that we're clear on, Section 5 is just one part around pre-clearance and the formula that allowed, that enforced southern states like Georgia, who had a history of voter suppression and racist tactics around our voting practices. And it only made them have to get pre-clearance before they instituted any of these changes that we're seeing today, like polling locations closing, combining of locations, the laws that we're passing in the state legislature that by and large are disenfranchising people of color to vote. And so I want to go, if my colleagues have not gotten it done, because it has passed the House at this point and it is still held up in the Senate, but there's an opportunity to take it a little further. We shouldn't just go back to where we were in 2013 before Shelby v. Holder and this Section 5 was struck down. Each generation has an obligation to move the ball one step forward, to move us one step closer to full equality and full access to our democracy. So that is what I want to do. We need to be talking about same-day voter registration. Some states have same-day voter registration. I went out to, because I love getting involved and helping people to exercise their right to vote. And I married the right person, because so does my husband. So for his birthday in February, what he wanted to do, I don't think many people plan this for their 38th birthday, but he wanted to go to Las Vegas to volunteer for the Nevada caucuses. So we went out and we volunteered. We were assigned a location where we helped sign people up for the day of the caucuses to come and cast their vote to decide who was going to be the Democratic nominee for president. But my job was, if someone was not already registered who showed up that day, I took them over to the next table so that they could sign up the same day and register to vote. They could sign up right outside of the room and then go inside and cast their vote. We don't have that option here in Georgia. Voter registration is cut off 30 days before the election here in Georgia. And so there are a lot of people who might move here after that date. We know that Atlanta is a place of promise for so many young people moving here, looking for a better life, moving from other places. And if they move here in the month of October, unless they get here before the first week is over, they don't get an opportunity to vote in Georgia. And we need to make sure that we are equalizing the right to vote across the country. It should not be that if you live in Nevada, you can register to vote on the same day, but in Georgia, you can't. And I want to make sure that we add things into this new Voting Rights Act that make it more accessible for everyone across the board.
It seems as though our laws haven't caught up with today's technology, which
Quite.
is amazing. It's amazing. Ms. Chatman, please feel free to jump in at any time with a question or concern that you may have.
Yes, hi, Senator. How will you protect if you go protect the United States Post Office Service?
The United States Post Office. So I actually just got an update from a member of Congress. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, I'm not quite a member of the caucus yet. I'm looking forward to getting there. But I've already been in touch with members of Congress around what the plan is. And Speaker Pelosi has already integrated a plan across the entire Democratic caucus. So we know what's going to happen on the House side. But our problem right now, Damita, is we don't have a United States Senate who is willing to do right by the American people. My goal between now and November is to do everything that I can to make sure that Georgia delivers 2 U.S. senators, 2 Democratic U.S. senators, so that we can flip the balance of the U.S. Senate. Because right now, no matter what we pass on the House side, we keep seeing things being held up on the Senate side. We saw the HEROES Act, getting people the support that they needed on the ground. And these aren't things that just help Democrats. These are things that help people in our states across the board. And we have to make sure that we put leaders in office that are willing to listen to the people that need their help and their support. So right now, the House is doing exactly what they should be doing, but we just don't have leadership, especially from Georgia, in the Senate who's willing to do their part.
Okay, good. I know your seat will be up, and we're going to need people in that seat that is going to be ready to represent District 5. And another question I have, what are you going to do for the Black community? Because it seems like, and I'm like over in if you go to Buckhead, in some areas of Buckhead you going to be at, then you go to Bankhead. So what are you going to do to kind of bring those communities together? Because you go to one side of the district, I mean, it's popping and booming. You go to the other side of District 5, and it's just like they're there. So what is your agenda to help the Black community?
And Damita, I would say it's not just District 5. This is across the board. We see a system of the have and have-nots across the board in so many different instances in our country, in our state, and especially here in Atlanta. Atlanta has the lowest income economic mobility for any major metropolitan city in the country. And so what we see is you're more likely to stay in the situation that you're born in Atlanta than any other cities across the country. Right now, my district, my Senate district, it starts in Buckhead and it goes all the way down through Vine City and all the way down Old National to the Fayette County line. So I've seen this across the board. And that's why every decision that I make sure that I make it with the premise of centering those most marginalized. If we always get to that point where we're looking at who is going to be most impacted and who's most marginalized in this decision-making process, then I think we will all come out better and we will end up lifting up more of our communities. That's why we have to continue to invest in our healthcare system, because we see who is catching the brunt of COVID-19. COVID-19 has shined a pandemic on all of these other ills that are facing our society and all of the disproportionate impacts that they have on the Black community. So when it comes to education, we look at the school system. We look at schools just started in Atlanta public schools last week, last Monday, and my Carter Cakes is just started kindergarten, virtual kindergarten. And I know that there are some people who still work outside of their home and they have to go to work every day just to pay their bills. My husband and I are fortunate that we can do both of our jobs from home. So we're here in the home with him. And so I worry about the children that are in Carter's class whose parents don't have the luxury of staying home with them or getting a support system to come into the home to help them learn. What's going to happen to those children? But it all goes back to leadership and who we put into place. For far too long, we've allowed leaders in place who are not looking at our communities and centering those most marginalized and impacted by the decisions that they make.
Good. And going to Congress, because I just have the faith that you're going to be the next Congresswoman of District 5. When you get there, what are you going to do to try to cross the aisle? Because I know, and you know, in order to get something done, you got to create those relationships and you got to cross the aisle. Sometimes people might not understand, why is she over there with the Republicans? But you got to cross the aisle and get those relationships. So how are you going to work with the people that cross that aisle to kind of get in the middle get some understanding.
So I'm not necessarily trying to lead from the middle, because I think that's what often gets our leaders in trouble. Nobody's willing to take that bold stand and stand firmly on what they believe in. What I'm willing to do is listen to anybody who is willing to center those most marginalized and look out for the people most impacted by the decisions that they make. And I'm willing to work with them. However, there are some people in Congress who fundamentally do not believe in my humanity, your humanity, yours, Norman, as a person. And I am not willing to work with those people, because there are some people out there willing to work with them, but it's not me.
I love it. I love it. Let me ask you a question, Senator. I know that it was a big controversy over you taking this seat, putting your name in this seat. And I got the law that was in the bylaws. Could you explain that so people can understand what was the process in that?
Absolutely. So the way that the state law is currently written, and I say currently written because if a legislator wants to change it, then I support that, because we need more clarity. But the way that the state law is currently written, after a primary, if a member of Congress or a member of the other party, either party, passes away, then the state executive committee of the Democratic or Republican Party chooses the nominee to go on the ballot. So because Congressman Lewis passed away in July and our state primary was in June, then it reverted back to the Democratic Party of Georgia, simply because there was a Republican on the ballot. Then we got to choose who we wanted as the Democrat to replace Congressman Lewis's name on the ballot. The Democratic Party of Georgia, I recused myself from the process, but there was a nominating committee formed that was comprised of former DPG Chair DuBose Porter, current Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, former gubernatorial nominee Stacey Abrams, former gubernatorial nominee Jason Carter, and the chair of the Fulton County Democratic Party, LaWanna Hurd, the chair of the DeKalb County Democratic Party, John Jackson. Those members came together and they reviewed 132 applicants to come down, to dwindle it down to a list of 5 finalists. I am very fortunate that I was one of those 5 finalists. And of those 5 finalists, each finalist was given equal time to present their platform, to present why they should be chosen by the state executive committee to be on the ballot in November as the Democratic nominee. And I was overwhelmingly voted by the state executive committee of the Democratic Party of Georgia to be the nominee on the November ballot. And there is another election on September 29th. That election is to fill the unexpired term. There are 7 people in that race. And with 7 people, it is highly likely that it will go into a runoff. The runoff is scheduled for December 1st. We know that after an election, there's about a week before votes are certified. And so that election will be certified the following week. The last votes of Congress this year is on December 10th. December 10th, 2020. And so whoever wins that special election has 0 bearing on who is sworn in for the full 2-year term on January 30th, which I hope that will be me, because I am doing everything that I can to get out in front of the voters, to meet the voters, and to earn their support to be their voice in Congress on January 3rd.
Thank you for that. I can turn it back over to Mr. Carter right now.
But keep your thinking cap on, Ms. Damita. I really like that last answer, because I think that there's a lot of fog around that. And
Absolutely.
I think you explained it very, very well. Now, my next question to you, I had it for one specific purpose, but because of your life experience, perhaps you can answer it on 2 or 3 different levels. And that's the impact of COVID-19 on our school system, but also on our health system and on our society as a whole, because to my understanding, you are a living example of what can happen to one with that disease.
So I contracted COVID-19 in early March down at the state capitol. It was so early in the process of what we know about COVID-19, there weren't even tests available the first day that I went to the doctor, and I had to come back a few days later to get tested. When I quarantined myself, I stayed home, and I had a spiked fever of over 103 degrees for 4 days straight. And then finally, I was able to get my fever down. I ended up in the ER at one point, multiple doctor's appointments, medicine. At one point, my doctor gave me an inhaler to help open up my lungs. And I've never used an inhaler. I don't have asthma or anything. I literally had to go to YouTube to look up a video to figure out how I even used how to use an inhaler. At one point, I literally had to turn the news off, listen to the statistics, because so many people were dying from this disease. And I didn't know which side of this I was going to end up on. And I literally thought I was going to die. My husband took care of me. My son was in the home with me. And luckily, neither of them ever got sick. Then I started, after I came up from being in the bed for 3 weeks straight, I started to look at all of the other impacts that was happening across the state, across the country from COVID-19, and quickly realized that everything that COVID-19 was exposing has already been here. COVID-19 just shined a spotlight on it and put it in a way so that more people were paying attention. People started asking me to be on calls about the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 in the Black community. And I had to stop them and say, it's not just COVID-19 that has a disproportionate impact. We have to think about all of the other underlying health conditions that make you more susceptible to COVID-19 and make you more susceptible to being hospitalized from COVID-19. And that includes a lack of health care in our communities. And so as we look at this, that's why healthcare has come to the top of the list of the concerns that I want to address, because so many people didn't have the opportunity to. I could text my doctor when I wasn't feeling well, and he would call in a new prescription. That's not everybody's reality. And everybody should have access to high quality healthcare. Not everybody who can afford it, but everybody should. And that's just not the reality. And now looking at decisions that were made, like the mask mandate, I remember writing a letter to Governor Kemp asking him to suspend the anti-mask mandate that was put in place to combat the KKK back in the day, so that people, like adults, wouldn't wear masks out in public. But there is no provision in the Georgia mask mandate that would allow in cases of public health crises or pandemics. Other states have that. So I wrote a letter to the governor asking him to suspend the mask mandate so that people like my husband, who's 6'3", my husband is a big guy, a Black man. And he's like, when I go out in places, this was early on, and masks weren't readily available, and people were still trying to figure out how to get their hands on masks, and people were tying bandanas across their face just so that they could keep themselves safe, because we knew the impacts in the Black community. And my husband was like, I'd rather take my chances with COVID, because if I go out in public and I tie something random across my face that doesn't necessarily look like a surgical mask, then people are going to follow me around. People are going to think I'm up to no good because of the systemic racism in our society and how Black men are still targeted in our communities. And so I wrote the letter to Governor Kemp, and of course he'll never give me credit for it, and that's okay as long as my people got taken care of. But he suspended the mask mandate in Georgia so that there weren't additional reasons for Black men to be targeted in our society. So just thinking about all of the ways that COVID-19 has shown us how interconnected all of the disparities and isms are that face the Black community, that we're able to now think about and address, and how we need to be addressing these things across the board. Thinking about how children are still, as I mentioned earlier, get left behind in our education system because some people are still struggling with getting access to the internet. There are some parts of our state where they don't have access to broadband. And yet, if we're having virtual school, this is what happens. Thinking about who's going to be left behind in these decisions that we're making.
Fantastic. And I agree. It's a very, very sad, but you know what? In a backhanded way, it's a blessing to have someone there in your seat who has lived through it, who knows what it's about, and can talk factually, and as opposed to figuratively about the impacts of this disease. And you make great points about the how the pandemic has shined a bright light on societal inequities. So thank you for that. Speaking of societal inequities, as we flow right along here, police reform appears to be a national concern.
Yes.
Is it a priority for your constituency? What changes would be your first priority? And how do you feel about qualified immunity, also known as sovereign immunity for police departments?
So police reform, as the district that covers the heart of downtown Atlanta, we are still seeing unrest in the streets. We're still seeing people out protesting, raising their voices. And at some point, we're going to have enough leaders there that are actually going to listen to why people are protesting. So we can't just tell people to go home without listening to why they were out in the streets in the first place. So I'm looking forward to making sure that I go to Congress with listening ears so that I can be their voice and relay the message that they're sending when they're out in the streets. Police reform definitely has to happen. And speaking of qualified immunity, I actually introduced a bill this legislative session that would get rid of qualified immunity for police officers. So I guess that tells you exactly where I stand on that issue. But it is something that we just saw the Supreme Court decide on, but we're starting from an unequal playing ground. And police officers have to be held to the same standards, if not higher, than other people in our communities, because they are there to serve and protect us. And if they are then the ones that are hurting people in our communities or targeting people in our communities, and knowing that the likelihood of someone bringing charges against them, no matter the circumstances, simply because that they're a police officer, is not okay. And so that's why I introduced a bill to repeal qualified immunity in the state legislature, and I'll continue to fight for that when I get to Congress.
Well, I lay myself out there as a living witness. If you ever need a witness, I have written a book on police inequities. It's been out now for about 4 years. In case you don't know, I'm a former police officer, and for citizens out there, there are systemic problems in all police departments throughout the country, starting with training all the way through to peer pressure. And those things need to be dealt with. And I can tell you factually that from conversations I had while I was a police officer, the one thing that cops fear is being sued for the actions that they take. Believe me, that's more than any threat of arrest or being fired. But when the prospect of losing your home, and I've heard this in conversations among police officers, they really fear that. And that was how that policy came to be implemented just boggles my mind. But it's all about looking at the people who would complain the most, which are our low income and minority people. It's again another part of the systemic effort to take away their voice and to take away their redress of grievances. So I offer myself up if you ever need.
I appreciate that. I was just I have one of my sorority sisters. She was a military officer and served in Iraq, and she posted on Facebook just 2 days ago when thinking about everything that happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And she said, as a military officer, like, it's about the training. And so, like, what you said was spot on and really tied to what she said. She said, as a military officer, when she was trained, if she would have ever shot an enemy of our country in the back 7 times, as they were like in the back 7 times, she would have been dishonorably discharged and brought up on charges and jailed. And this is someone who, a military officer that served in Iraq. And she's like, but that's the training. She said, even during training, if they would have ever pretended to do that, then they would have been disciplined. And it's all about the training and what is allowed. And if we continue to allow it, it's going to continue to happen.
Yeah, it's less about training, trust me, than it is about what's allowed. Believe me. We move on because I could talk about this subject all day long. What constitutional amendments, there are 27, would you propose changing to improve the lives of your constituents, if there are any that need to be changed?
Constitutional amendments. Well, I think that when we get into constitutional amendments, we need to be careful because it is a living, breathing document, but when we change things in the Constitution, we need to remember that we're not always going to be in charge and we're not always going to have the power. And it can come back on us in ways that we never imagined. So I'm always a little skeptical of toying around with the Constitution and making changes. What I would like to see is making sure that we look at getting judges in place that really view all of our citizens as equals, to make sure that when we bring things to the Supreme Court where they're making decisions based on the Constitution, that everybody is viewed through an equal lens.
Very important point. I think you could have added that in your position, you would have some sort of influence, wouldn't you, on judges coming through?
So on the Senate side.
Oh, okay. Just want to make sure. But you can make a
I
phone
mean,
call.
I'm willing to accept some additional responsibilities so that we can get us some good judges in place.
Yeah, and that's again, it's all about power, folks. And what we're talking about is getting people into office who have your concerns and your needs and your desires in office. And I'm right here in Georgia. I'm sure you can look at what's transpired in the past 3 years or so, 4 years. You have to go back 4 years to what happened in the election in a few years ago, that to see that there is a need for change, there's a need for influence, and this is your opportunity to put candidates in office who, as the senator just said, can stand on their own 2 feet and champion your causes. And that's what you need. We don't need macaronis. We need people who can stand up straight.
Absolutely.
That's the best analogy I could come up with at the time.
Macaronis. I never heard that one before.
Yeah, I couldn't think of anything else, but macaroni can't stand alone by itself. Or spaghetti.
Mr. Carter.
Yes.
Let me ask the senator, right now, and you live down here, especially in your some of your districts, you can ride through, I'd say, Camerton Road, and you see the young kids selling water and Gatorade. Do you have a plan and a vision for our young kids? Because when I was coming up back in the day, we used to have the CETA program. In the summer, we had jobs for the kids. What kind of vision do you see for the young kids? Because right now it's not an outlet out there for them. So what are you going to do with the kids that's in District 5? Do you have a vision or plan for them?
Yes, absolutely. And not necessarily connected to that one situation, because I'm also a firm believer in allowing people to lead in the lanes that they signed up to serve in. And so I've been in communication with, I know Atlanta City Councilman Andre Dickens had a program and a plan in place where he was teaching kids how to get their business license and helping them so that they could make sure that they were set up in places that were high traffic and high impact, but not necessarily in the middle of intersections, and cleaning up after themselves and like starting their own small businesses. And so that is something that once all of this started back up over the summer, I reached back out to him to find out what was going on with that program. And I feel like there are a lot of things that I'll be asked about as a member of Congress that aren't necessarily in the purview of the federal role and what a member of Congress does, but is absolutely something that a member of Congress can use their voice on and speak out to make sure that local resources and local ordinances are in place to help young people. Also, I know that Congressman Lewis had a youth program, and I remember being a part of when they would go on trips, I would chaperone and help out with that youth program. And that is absolutely something that I want to continue once I'm in office. And that starts with middle school kids and high school kids, bringing them in so that they have alternatives and ways to learn about the government. We know that kids don't get all of the information that they need around civics when they're in school, especially now with the pandemic going on. I know what that it will exactly look like, but I remember one of the staff members, Rochelle O'Neill, handled that program, and students would come in over the weekend and learn different portions different curriculums, and then they would go on trips, and they even had an opportunity to go over to Selma with Congressman Lewis. And so I'm looking forward to continuing some of those programs to give young people something to do over the weekends when they do have this idle time, and especially as a way to continue to impact the way that they view voting and their civic engagement processes.
Okay, good. One more question. So I know you're my chair over the Democrat Party. Will you still be able to be the chair, or will you have to step down from that position once you win this seat?
I am able to remain as chair. There is nothing in our bylaws that would prevent me from being your chairwoman. We're in a great place right now with the Democratic Party, and I'm proud of the success and the place that we are as a battleground state under my leadership.
Thank you.
I had a question that just popped up, I guess because of some things that you were talking about as far as youth. And I find that very important. But how do you feel, or what is your position on increasing the ability of working parents to find places of daycare for their preschool children, similar to the Head Start or something like that?
This is a number one priority for me. And I'm not sure if I work for the National Domestic Workers Alliance. And so we are the voice of 2.5 million domestic workers across this country who are overwhelmingly women of color. And the domestic worker movement was started right here in Atlanta, Georgia by Dorothy Bolden. Dorothy Bolden convened Black women around when MARTA was first coming to Atlanta, and they weren't going to do the bus lines up to some of the northern suburbs. And so these Black women she organized them to influence elections so that they could get to their jobs every day. And her family is still here in Atlanta, and she was very influential, and she grew up in Vine City. And the National Domestic Workers Alliance today is working with another organization called Caring Across Generations. And the number one issue with Caring Across Generations is universal family care. Universal family care will make sure that children have early care that they need so that parents can go to work and make a living and make sure that their children are safe during the process. Especially now during the age of COVID, we're seeing that how critical family care is. And it also, because it's family care and not just child care, even looks at elder care, because so many people are living in this generation while they have young children to care for and their elderly parents to care for. And so universal family care would be something that covers you from early childhood care all the way up to elder care. And that is a number one part of my platform and something that I plan to introduce when I become a member of Congress.
I asked that question on behalf of, well, my late mother, who was a domestic worker, but also this would flow
and I
into.
didn't even know that your mom was a domestic worker.
Oh, you can look at me and tell. No, but seriously, I for several years here in Atlanta, I worked in the hospitality industry, where income is low for the workers, and access to good economic childcare is so important. And for many of these workers, it's the difference between working and not working.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I wish we could really expound on that, and that would be talked about a lot more, because that affects thousands of people in the metropolitan area.
Absolutely.
So right after I finish this interview with you guys, I'm joining a conversation with the National Domestic Workers Alliance and our WeDip chapter, We Dream in Black. And they are introducing their Unbought and Unbossed agenda, which is the Black Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. So I'm joining, that's why I was asking if we were gonna finish up at 7, because I'm joining on with them to, as they introduce and release their Black Domestic Worker agenda.
Wow, just have a nexus going on here. I enjoy it. Senator Williams, what is your position on quality public education and funding it for success?
My position, my child is in public schools right now. He's a student at Atlanta Public Schools. I taught in Atlanta Public Schools and Clayton County Schools. And I understand that right now we're not seeing, we're seeing the inequities across the board when it comes to even our public education, because so many people just, again, back to COVID-19, so many people just don't have the support systems in place to help in a virtual situation. And I also know that right now when we looked at the state budget this year, when we passed the state budget on the first iteration, I was the only person that voted no. And people looked at me like I was crazy. I will never vote for a budget that we talk about defunding the police and people get in an uproar, but nobody's in an uproar over defunding public education.
Wow.
The state of Georgia defunded public education by nearly $1 billion with the B. And we have not heard enough about that. So I will always stand on the side of public schools and public education. I'm a product of public schools. My son could go anywhere, could go to any school in the city, but we chose for him to go to our neighborhood public schools, because if he didn't, then who is going to be there to make sure that the voices are heard of people that are very involved and engaged, as I am, to make sure that our public schools are getting the funding and the resources that they need. So I'm always going to be an advocate for our public school systems and the funding to make sure that every child is getting equal access to education.
Very important, because if listening to what I'm hearing from Washington, D.C., at the top, very top there, it seems as though our president is trying to subvert the public school system by diverting money in other directions. And that's definitely not to the benefit of minorities, for sure, and even people who value a great public education. So thank you for that. Very quickly, because of your experience in the Georgia state government, how do you feel about states resisting the intake of Medicaid and Medicare money?
Good question.
These were political decisions. I've always stood on the side of Medicaid expansion to make sure that people can get the care that they need, and call it what you want to call it. But I mean, if we need to come up with a new term so that Governor Kemp can feel like he got a win and didn't have to go along with what the Democrats wanted, then I'm all for coming up with a different name, as long as people can get the care that they need. Right now, we have so many people in the state of Georgia. Well, this was even before the pandemic, but even more so now. It is crazy that we are seeing people without care. We have the unemployment system that is backed up. People are not getting their unemployment checks through the Department of Labor and don't have a way to get tested or to get the treatment that they need if they get tested, but yet we're still refusing to expand Medicaid. That is a 90-10 federal match. So we actually get money coming into the state by expanding Medicaid. We introduced, well, not we, because I wasn't supportive of it, but Republicans in this state introduced something last year around Medicaid funding, or around their way to fakely expand Medicaid, to say that we were going to pay more money to cover fewer people, when we could have just expanded Medicaid and gotten people the care that they need and brought jobs and money into the state. But because of political reasons, we weren't willing to do that. Leadership in the state was not willing to do that. That's why I continue to hark on everybody showing up to vote, because there is someone that you know that needs Medicaid expansion, but Republicans who are in leadership in this state are refusing to expand it.
I think with my experience, because I've had several years of experience with Medicaid, Medicare, and government benefits, is that I think one of the problems with this, and you may agree or may not, is that when it comes to government benefits such as Medicaid and Medicare, food stamps, there's always a dark face put on it. And what's really happening is the greatest impact on these laws, or not having those provisions, are people who are not of color, but who are white. Because I can tell you that right now you have people in Appalachia are suffering because their governors will not accept Medicare or Medicaid. And that's what I'm talking about, forming allegiances and getting communities involved. Not just community of color, but communities.
Yeah,
period.
we have to build multiracial communities to get this across, because at the end of the day, when we're looking at who's being impacted by a lack of health care, it doesn't have a Democrat or an R beside their name. These are people that are hurting. When we look at people who are being left out and not getting their unemployment checks because their jobs have closed down due to COVID-19, doesn't have a D or an R beside their name. These are people, these are Georgians that are hurting.
Thank you.
Senator Nikema, I know you live here in Atlanta. Would you think about doing something for the homeless population? Because if we don't get a handle on that, that's going to look like another Skid Row downtown Atlanta. So how can you work with the local and Representative Roger Bruce and them to get a handle on that? What can you do about that on the homeless problem?
So this is something that has been an active conversation on the city level. And I know that there is federal funding that has been brought in around this, and how that money is actually utilized on the municipal level is up to the mayor and the city council. So I will always be an advocate to make sure that we get the resources brought down, and then we're going to have to work with our local leaders to make sure that the funding is being spent properly and spent the way that we want it to be spent once the money is brought down. But I will be a strong advocate in DC to make sure that we are getting the resources that we need and deserve in the 5th district.
Senator Williams, this hour has passed by so quickly. I'd like to give you a couple of few minutes to give us a closing statement on your candidacy, please.
Thank you so much. I am State Senator Nikema Williams, and I'm the Democratic nominee for the 5th Congressional District. It will be the honor of my life to be your voice in Congress come January 3rd. The election is coming up on November 3rd, but we do have early voting and absentee voting happening now. You can request your absentee ballot right now. You can go to the Secretary of State's website or your local Board of Elections, request your absentee ballot, fill it out, fill it in early, get it returned so that you are not left out of this process. Everybody should have the absolute right to vote safely, and voting by mail is the safest way to do so. If you choose to vote in person, we'll have 3 weeks of early voting here in Georgia, and we even have an opportunity to vote on Saturday and Sunday. I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation with the voters of the 5th Congressional District. You can learn more about me on my website, nikemaforcongress.com. That is NIKEMA Congress.com. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to serving.
Well, thank you so much, Senator, for providing us with a lot of information and really a clear view of just who you are. Ms. Chatman, always a pleasure to see you. And thank you so much for helping us to make this program a success. And we thank all of you listeners and reminding you, voting is so important. Your influence counts, and I'll repeat it again, 43 million voices in this country did not vote in 2016. Don't let that happen this year. You see what happens when we don't vote. So thank you. I wish you all a good day, a good night, and thank you again, and best of luck to you, Senator Williams, in your pursuit to lead this country into something really, really great.
Thank you.
Thank you.